Okay, so today we're going to be looking at how to navigate your router, home consumer router. So this one is actually, I've got the computer really hooked up to a router. There is no internet connection right now, but it'll still be just like hooking your router, except there'll be internet. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and open a command prompt. And I can right click on the start button and I can go to command prompt. And the reason I need to do this is because I want to do an IP config all, okay? And this has a lot of different adapters because this has Bluetooth and it has a Wi-Fi and it has VMware, but I'm going to kind of scroll up to the one that I know is going to be it, and yours might be called something different, and you probably won't have so many choices, but right here, Ethernet adapter Ethernet, okay? And that's the one that I'm looking for. Yours might be called Ethernet adapter, you know, LAN or something, but usually you're only going to have one choice. So looking through this, what I care about is I've got my IP address, but I'm looking for this right here, default gateway, okay? And if you do this at your house, the same thing's going to happen. Just do an ipconfig/all and look for your default gateway. And this, I'm going to say, is probably the same default gateway that 95% of you have. It's the most common, 192.168.1.1. Some of you, I think Netgear sometimes does a 192.168.0.1. If you have Google Mesh, that becomes a little bit different, but this is probably the most common one for 95% of computers. And the reason I care about this is because now I'm going to go ahead and open up a browser, and I'm going to type that in. So I'm going to type my default gateway in. And there's a lot of times they give you disks and other stuff to do it, but frankly, this is all I need to do. So this will take me to the home page of my router. Every router is going to look a little different. This is a Linksys. You might have a Netgear, you might have a D-Link, but they're all going to look somewhat similar and look for a username and password. This guy wants you to use the router CD. We're not going to use any of that junk. We're just going to say, yes, it's open, it's not secure, that's fine, and we're going to say continue. Okay, now again, this page is not one that you're normally going to see. This is very specific to the Linksys. Most of you will just come straight to the login, but this is just letting us know, hey, the internet connection's down. That's fine, we're going to log in. Now, it's asking for the router password. And this is the most scary thing. This is basically a brand new router that has, you know, never been configured. That being said, even though this has never been configured, your router is probably the same. And what I mean by that is if you have a username and password, the vast majority of routers, unless they've been pre-configured, some fiber has, so you might find that, and that might be in the bottom of your modem, but the vast majority of the username is admin, A-D-M-I-N, and the password is also usually admin, A-D-M-I-N. So username admin, password admin. Sometimes it's admin as a username and password, the word password as a password. So basically try those two combinations. Try admin admin or admin password. For this particular one, it wants a router password, so we're just going to guess. Let's try admin. And that was it. And we are in our router. And your router at home might also be exactly that. I highly suggest that you change that. That is an absolutely horrible password, and that is something that you should probably change. So where you change that, all of those are going to be a little bit different. One thing here is my actual router name. It has this kind of silly name. So I might do something here and just say, you know what, that's just a long name. So I'm going to say this is my Linksys wireless. Actually, I'll just say it's my Linksys router. And that's fine. This thing here, changing your router name, is only going to display inside your network. So this is not your Wi-Fi. I'll show you that in a second. But this is something that sometimes just internally in a network you might want to see. because Linksys 0, there might be some other Linksys device that I have that's not a router, and I might not recognize it for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and say yes to that and change that. So now it's actually called Linksys router. So that's a little bit nicer. Now let's go to, let's actually look around here. And again, the layout is going to be very different depending on your router, but all of the same type of stuff is usually here. So what I'm looking for is our password. And sometimes it's under profile, account, things like this. Here we go. So this one here, it says it was under connectivity, these little gears, and it says router password. Somewhere it's going to say that for you too. So you definitely want to edit this, change it from the admin password or password to something else, because anybody that's on your network can guess that your router is 192.168.1.1 because 95% of routers are, and if they're on your network, you know, maybe you got someone over and saying, hey, can I use your Wi-Fi? They can go in here and change your password and lock you out, or go in here and change settings that you don't want. So you need to be careful with that. Firmware updates. Yes, a lot of routers actually require firmware updates. There was a lot of attacks with consumer home routers a while ago. So you need to make sure that it's just like flashing your BIOS. And in fact, you are, because there is a computer, a CPU, and a motherboard inside that router. So you need to check for your firmware. It tells me my firmware here. I can look up my model. This one will do it automatic and go online. You can do that. Or you can look it up and upload it. It is good to update your firmware on your router, and it's something most people never do. But if you own the router, you definitely should do that. Okay, so let's look around at a couple other things. So we change our router password. Device list. Pretty much all of them will say something like this. So this is just going to be a list of who's on. And what's really interesting with that is I can sit there and click, you know, information on this, and that's particular Linksys, but you guys will have something close to that. And right here, it can tell me my MAC address. And that's a little scary. So anybody that connects to my network, I also know their MAC address. And the only reason that's scary is just for MAC address spoofing and things like that, but we know their serial number, as it were, of them. Their IP address doesn't really matter. The MAC address in my network is how the packets are going to actually get there. Technically frames, but you get the idea. This one allows a guest network, okay? And I could turn that on here, guest network. This has the parental controls and stuff. Now, I will say one that's really important here is media prioritization. Sometimes they call it media prioritization. A lot of times they call it QoS, which means quality of service. Okay, and what that means is that I can tell the router, hey, you know what? I want my Xbox to get the packets before anybody else. I want my phone, my VoIP phone, to get the packets before anybody else. So I can turn on prioritization, and on this particular one, sometimes it's a drop down of computers, or you know, sometimes it's putting in the MAC address, which again, usually you can find where those MAC addresses are. But for this one, I can just take, these are all the devices connected to it, and I can take it, and I can just drop it up here. And that means those packets are going to go there before anybody else. QoS can be very aggressive. And what I mean by that is we add prioritization. You know, if you're in a house with a lot of people with computers, and you're, you know, a gamer, and you've got your PlayStation 4 or whatever, and you are wanting to get the packets first, some QoS is so aggressive that if you put your PlayStation up here, you're going to have a wonderful experience. It's going to get all the bandwidth. It can increase your bandwidth. Your bandwidth is your bandwidth. That's what you deal with your ISP. So you can't really increase that per se. Okay, you're not going to go faster, but all of that available speed that you have will go to you first. So it can make a tremendous difference. But again, sometimes it's overly aggressive, and it can do the opposite for everybody else, where everybody else is going, okay, I can't even watch a YouTube video anymore. So be a little careful with QoS. It really depends on the brand and manufacturer, and sometimes you can do it in order. This one's just kind of a high priority, normal priority, but you know, that's this particular router. This has a speed test. Okay, that's interesting. Connectivity, actually, we're gonna hop over to this one, which is called wireless. You guys might have wireless security. You might have all sorts of things. This is very common, and you probably have this too, a 2.4 gigahertz network and a 5 gigahertz network. If you have Charter, for example, Spectrum, you probably have horrible names that are like, you know, Charter or Spectrum 2, and then a bunch of just random letters and numbers. If you live in a crowded area, you live in an apartment building, you live, you know, very close to your neighbors, this has become highly problematic. And I've been to clients' homes where I'm like, I don't even know what Wi-Fi are you? And then sometimes they actually have to look on the fridge for the magnet. Go in here and change this. It's a good idea to. This is where I'm going to change what's actually being displayed. So I'm going to go to my 2.4 gigahertz, and I can call this whatever I want. I've seen this one before, but you know, I can call it FBI van, just to be funny. But you can call it something like home. You can call it whatever you want. Then your network mode. This is only an N router, and a lot of you probably have that too. Some of you might now have AC. That's kind of the newest one that's out there. But this is just saying, will you allow anything else? This is N. Again, if yours is AC, this is fine, and you're going to get the fastest speeds with wireless, but you need to make sure that you don't have any old wireless devices still on, because if you do, they won't be able to connect. So you need to be a little careful with this. Most people keep it as mixed and backwards compatible, but one thing that's important to note is B is a very slow technology. This is 10 megabits per second, G's 54 megabits per second, and we can get up to 300 megabits per second. So this is substantially faster. AC, we're getting into gigahertz. If I have a B, if I do mixed and I have a B device come on, then my entire network will get slowed down, okay? And that is important to know. So sometimes you might want to say, no, I don't want any B and G. If I've got someone with that old of a device, and they are quite old at this point, then they don't need to be on my network. So you can force it to N. If you have an AC router, this is what you got to be careful with. If you have an option for AC and N only, that's fine. But you might not want to go AC only because there's still quite a few N devices out. So you can kind of think of that. Security mode. You positively, absolutely should have security on your Wi-Fi. You should never have an open one. So what do we want? WEP. This is one of the original ones. This is the one that sometimes you still see people that have. It's a super long password. It's like big T, little L, 3, 4, and it's this huge password. Everybody goes, oh, it must be really safe. WEP, one of the early technologies, is actually broken very easily because unfortunately you can sit there and sniff networks, and there's a handshake that hands off that kind of goes, hey, you know, here's my password. That handshake can be broken. And that handshake can be in a good busy network with one router. You can use certain programs to sniff Wi-Fi networks, and you can break WEP sometimes in an hour, 2 hours. So don't use WEP anymore. We should be using WPA2. Okay, that's where we're at. And notice this one doesn't have WPA, the first one. There's no reason to use WPA, the first one. And what's funny is WEP, they were so confident with this security on the network that actually stands for wired equivalent privacy. And wow, you're saying it's just as good as a wired, it's equivalent to a wired connection. No, it's not. WPA is Wi-Fi protected access. They kind of backed off on their claims a little bit. WPA we don't use anymore. We're on WPA2. WPA3 is around the corner. It's close, but you can't go on WPA3. Even if you get a router that releases it in the next 6 months or a year, your devices are going to have to support it too. But WPA2 is quite strong. There's been only one major hack on it, and most routers fixed it. It was actually called crack, and that was the break on it. That being said, remember what I said about updating your router. If you have a really old router, maybe you don't have that patch and you need it. But otherwise, do that. Most of the time, we just want WPA2 personal. Okay, enterprise is going to have certificates and stuff. For a home network, we do WPA2 personal. Okay, and then it asks us for a password. This doesn't have to. Do not make the log into your router the same password as this. And I would also suggest that this doesn't have to be crazy complex, because remember, you might be handing this out to people. So just a long sentence can be good. I mean, you can do something like, pizza is great! Exclamation point. And that's a pretty good password. Can it be hacked? Yes. But at that point, then you might have an FBI van outside of your house constantly, trying to hack it. It would take a long time. But what I'm saying is you can make it strong. I mean, don't make it password. But at the same time, you don't have to make it crazy complex, okay? Because this is something that is kind of given around a little bit. And you can log this stuff. Now, channel. To me, this is a very, very important part, okay? Not so much channel width. That's a little bit particular in the 2 and 4, but I'm going to come back to that. But it is your channels, okay? Most people leave this on auto. And I can't show you this demonstration, but normally I've got 5 routers in here for demonstration routers. And normally what I do is I plug them all on, and I keep them all on auto. And then I run a network scan and project it out for everybody to see what's going on. And most of the time, these routers can be very stupid. And what I mean by that is I've got 1 through 11 spectrum. One thing you have to understand is that when I look at it, if I have it on channel 2, it's not just on channel 2. It spreads from 1 and 3. It's on 2, but it's on a graph that goes from 1 to 3. Okay? It's weaker in 1 and weaker in 3, but it still overlaps. 2 is where it's the strongest. A lot of times with auto, they'll just kind of pile on to one channel. And you'll see sometimes, like channel 5, 6, 7 is just bombarded with tons of Wi-Fi. So there's free scanners. You can get them for your phone. I use one from AMP, I believe, and or Wi-Fi analysis. Okay, so this one's called, it's open source Wi-Fi analysis, and this will go through all of the different channels and everything, and channel graph. There we go. And it'll show you the different channels on side here. Now, right now I'm not on Wi-Fi, so it's not doing it. But if you're on Wi-Fi, it'll show you all your channels down here, and it'll show you the overlap. And again, this is just called Wi-Fi Analyzer. Okay, and this is on the Android store, but there's some for Apple's too, so you can look for that. But scan your house. Walk around and see what the heavy channels are being used. And whatever the heavy channels are being used around you, manually go in here and change your channel. You'll be surprised at how much better your internet can get by changing the channel on this, okay? So we'll keep this as 6. Broadcast your SSID, your service set identifier. This means broadcast out, here I've called it FBI van, okay? So, and I might even say FBI van to 2G, okay? So I know it's the 2 gigahertz one. So I call it this broadcast that out. So anybody looking for a Wi-Fi is going to see this. I can uncheck this. And what that does is just hides this. The Wi-Fi network still exists, but if someone just opens up their phone and say, hey, let's connect to Wi-Fi, it won't show up. They would have to manually type it in. Is it super secure? No, because again, one of those analyzers like I just showed you that's free will show it. But if I just drop down and say connect to a Wi-Fi, it won't. So there is a little security through obscurity. So you don't have to do it. Now, the only irritating part is if you don't enable it, it does mean you'll have to manually type it in. So like when you're connecting to network, you have to say, it's an other, and then you type in the name and then put the password. So that's up to you. Most people keep it on, but you don't necessarily have to. Now, let's head over here. This has a 5 gigahertz. And again, we can call this something, and we should, something very different. So we can call this NSA boat. And we'll call that 5G. So we can separate out the 2.4 from the 5. Now, a lot of people get confused right here and they say, okay, why do I have 2 wireless networks? Here's what's going on. The 2.4 gigahertz is one of the original. And if we look at your B and G, that's a lot of your 2.4. Your 2.4 gigahertz, although A, one of our original 802.11 standards, was a 5 gigahertz. 2.4 gigahertz, the lower the number, the farther it can go and the more it can penetrate. So your 2.4 gigahertz is great to be able to get to those back rooms, to be able to get outside, things like this. This is going to go much farther. Whereas the 5 gigahertz is a much bigger bandwidth, which means it can carry more bandwidth, okay? Just as it sounds. It can carry If you're doing a lot of streaming and stuff, 5 gigahertz is great because it's got a lot of bandwidth to pump that out. But because it's a higher number, because it's 5 gigahertz, because it's a much bigger wavelength, it can't go through walls as well. This is actually very limited. So which one should you connect to? If I've got a 3-bar 5 gigahertz or a 2 or 3 bar 5 gigahertz and a 5-bar 2.4, I'm going to connect to the 2.4. I'm going to have better luck with that. Basically, I always say to people, 5 gigahertz is great if you're in the same room or darn close to it. Okay, and if you've got a good strong signal, go in the 5 gigahertz. It's going to be a better performance. But if you're farther away, as this gets weaker, your 2.4 you should notice is stronger. Go ahead and jump on the 2.4. You're going to have a better experience. Okay, so that's kind of 5 gigahertz for kind of same room. But the idea is that 5 gigahertz is really good for that multimedia, the streaming the YouTube, the playing the games, things like this. I mean, nothing beats being hardwired. By far, plugging in directly to your router will always give you the best performance, okay? After that, though, if I'm in the same room, go 5 gigahertz, you're going to have great. If I'm getting farther away, go 2.4, okay? Network mode, again, this is that same. Now, notice, this is only N and A. Very interesting. Why? Because N has a 5 gigahertz channel, and A, one of the original standards, has a 5 gigahertz standard. Nobody really should be running around with 802.11a anymore. So this is probably okay to say wireless N only. On an AC network, you're going to see that equivalent. They'll be like, hey, just N and AC and stuff. Over here, notice, though, I have these others, B and G. Okay, because those are 2.4 gigahertz in nature, 802.11g, 802.11b, okay, B is older than G. Those were 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, so that's why you can see that. Whereas here, only N and A, one of the original, and now AC is 5 gigahertz. Security mode, do the same, WPA2 enterprise, okay, excuse me, not enterprise, personal. Because if I do enterprise, see, this is some of what I'm talking about. Okay, we have radius servers, we have certificates, things like this. This is for certain businesses that do it. Setting it up normally, and I would even say in most coffee shops and stuff, if you're setting up for small business, go personal. Okay, and again, put in a password. Does it have to be the same password? No, you can make them absolutely 2 different passwords. I would suggest, though, I mean, if you have pizza's great exclamation point, it's okay to also use the same password over here. Because if you're allowing someone in your 2.4, I guess you'd be like, no 5 gigahertz for you, but you're probably going to allow them on both, okay? Channel width, again, this is very specific. Most of those is auto, but I've got channels again. Usually 5 gigahertz isn't as crowded, okay, for a couple reasons. One, not everybody has 5 gigahertz routers, although now it's pretty close. But 2, remember, it's much shorter. So you're not going to get as much interference from neighbors, but still run one of those analyzers and look around and just be like, okay, is there one that's a little bit more clogged? If so, change it, okay? And then you click apply, and then you're going to have to restart this whole thing, okay? MAC address filtering. This is very interesting. So it used to be a form of protection, and it still is somewhat. So I can MAC address filter. Remember, I was able to look and see exactly those MAC addresses. So I can actually say deny. So I can add a MAC address, and I can copy and paste from this other one. You know, if someone's connected already, I can grab their MAC address, paste it in here, and if I say deny, that means, guess what? You can see my network, you'll never be able to go on. It's quite interesting to do the deny. Another way that some people do, and frankly, a little bit of wireless security and doing this, not a horrible way. I can also look at all my devices, find the MACs for all my devices, put that in the MAC address, say only allow for this, and then apply. And what that's going to do is even if someone has my password for my Wi-Fi, if they're not on my MAC address list of OK, they can't go on. This is not foolproof. This is not the best security ever because of something called MAC address spoofing. I can, in Windows and Linux and Mac, I can go in and change my MAC address. I can't actually change my MAC address. That is completely bound to my NIC. But like Windows, when Windows loads, it reads the MAC address from the NIC in the loading process and stores it in RAM. So once it's in RAM, I'm not really changing my MAC address of my NIC, but I'm changing what's stored in RAM, and for all intents and purposes, that's the MAC address that's running. So I can spoof my MAC address. Someone could find out your MAC address. I mean, this is a little harder. We're talking about a little bit more advanced, but it is absolutely doable and not very hard to do if you know what you're doing. Change their MAC address to you, and then try to get in this way. If you only had allow access, that might not be great. But if I have only allow MAC access, or only allow access for these Macs plus a password, that's pretty strong. And that's a pretty strong way to go. Wi-Fi protected access, this is where you press the button. And that's where you're going to press the button, and then basically you press the button on the other side and it allows it to connect. I'm not a huge fan of it. If you can, it's always much better to actually go in and do it yourself. And that's about the major pieces in here. The status diagnostic logs. Logs is always good to look at. Troubleshooting, that's what we just looked at. Again, enabling logs, if your router has it. This is quite interesting to do because, again, if we're trying to look and say, hey, is anybody logging in that shouldn't be? Enable logs, and you're going to get a lot of information about that, okay? We can ping right in here. Here's router firmware where we can add some of that router firmware, things like this. So really good stuff. And that is pretty much the major. So definitely change the name of your router. Change your password. Absolutely change the password for your router. Rename your Wi-Fi. Have a decent password on that, and maybe do some QoS. And outside of that, that's the major stuff to do, and that's how to kind of navigate. And again, this will look different depending on your router, but all the stuff's there. You just have to look for it, and it's the same terms. Okay, thanks.